I was still very red. It took a little over a month before my outside skin actually started to return to normal color. It looked like I'd been boiled.
DC, how did you find carnivore?
Um, okay, well, the short story, or the shortest path, my wife found it on YouTube, and we were doing some research on things for, we're trying to improve my immune system at the time. Um, but the at first, obviously, I thought it was just a gimmick because cutting carbs has been and something that athletes have done for decades, leading up to competition, sort of thing. And as a strength coach, I was thinking, there's nothing new there. So, how can cutting carbs help you build your immune system? So my first response actually was, this is bullshit. um, but the reason why we're doing all that is because of um, my blood cancer disease. So this all sort of started back in 2011, and I was living in Japan at the time, in the northern prefecture of Miyagi, between the city Sendai and the coast. And in March of that year, on March 11, we were hit by the 9 magnitude earthquake and then the tsunami. Um, from there, it was a pretty chaotic sort of situation to be in. Rolling aftershocks, if some of the aftershocks were over 8 magnitude themselves. It was, trying to find food and water. We're basically, from the next day, my wife and I were on bicycles for quite a while afterwards, just trying to find food and water for the family and for ourselves. Um, it was, pretty chaotic. And, we spent some time. Obviously, we had, I had family in Australia that were sort of hounding me to go back to Australia. But I was adamant that I was going to stay there and rebuild everything. And we started doing that. And by the time, I mean, several months passed, and we did a few things. We took out, we raised a bit of money and took some food and clothes and blankets and that sort of stuff out to some of the shelters, so, people who didn't have a home to go to. And this was several months later. And then, we start rebuilding our lives, going back to work. And in December, I decided to come back to Australia and visit family, just basically just to let them know, see for themselves that I was fine. There was nothing to worry about. And, I was perfectly safe, staying in Japan. But throughout that year, I'd been having a bit of trouble. Had a bit of abdominal pain. I was a bit sick every now and then. I had colds and flus and that sort of thing. And again, when I arrived in Australia in December of 2011, I had another flu just from the traveling. So I decided to get a checkup while I was here. Previous to that, I really just didn't have time to go to the doctor because of everything that was going on. Um, and they did a blood test, and when the test came back, he was looking a bit puzzled, and he told me, how it felt around my stomach area a bit, and he told me, look, I think you should stay here and get this sorted out. So my 2 weeks was then extended, and I had to tell my wife that I won't be back on time. I was due to fly back to Japan on the 4th of January in 2012. but she decided to come out here to Australia and just find out what was going on, find out if I, why I couldn't go back. And the day she arrived, which was actually the 4th, the day I was supposed to fly back to Japan, I got a call from the hospital in the city in Brisbane, and they asked me to come and see them. So the next day, we all went in together, and surprisingly, it took about 10 minutes after I arrived, and I was in a ward, in a bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses, and telling me all sorts of things. They didn't know what it was, but we need to do some tests, and you have a large mass around in your abdomen that we need to check, and all sorts of things. So at the time, my head was just spinning because I really didn't know what was going on. I mean, I felt fine, really, except for a cold or a flu. And so then the prognosis was, well, the initial, before they actually did the test, they said, look, you've got cancer. We don't know what type of cancer it is yet, and you have a large mass in your abdomen. So then the test began. And at the time, we just didn't know what was going on, so we just went with it. So after the test come back, they told me I have follicular lymphoma, very high stage 4, and I have a large mass tumor wrapped around my aorta. This follicular lymphoma is a type of blood cancer that starts in the lymphatic system. The biggest problem with this diagnosis is that it is a recurring type of cancer that has no cure, and the more you treat it, well, the best you can hope for is a remission period. But the more you treat it, the shorter those remission periods will be, and the more treatment you will need. So it's like a catch-22, really, isn't it? Like the more you treat it, the more it comes back. So basically what they're telling you is that for the rest of your life, if you survive the treatment, you're just going to need more and more treatment. So, that was a bit of a struggle to sort of get my head around. And on top of that, the tumor was so big, it was about the size of a football, and it was crushing other organs around it because I was quite slim. And it had already killed my left kidney, and my right kidney was down to just 12% capacity. So it was kind of a race between the cancer and the kidneys as to who was going to kill me first. But either way, at the outside, they thought maybe I'd have, without treatment, maybe 2 months to live if I looked after my kidney. 3 months at the very outside, but that would be about it. So then the operation started, and they had to try and get my kidneys to flow again. And so they had to put stents in, and they ended up replacing them every couple of months. So it's like a ongoing sort of operations on my kidney throughout that first year. And the first round, or the first lot of treatment they put me through, was what they call R-CHOP. Now, R-CHOP just means there's a group, a whole lot of these different types of chemotherapies, and it's very heavy dose. So they do it once every 3 weeks. But by the time I got to my first treatment, my wife, she only had 3 weeks off work, so she had to go back to Japan. So we had to decide whether I was going to go back to Japan or stay in Australia and get treatment. Obviously, we stayed because at the time we just didn't see any other option. So she decided to go back to Japan and get rid of everything we had, sell off what we couldn't keep and or give away what we couldn't keep, sort of thing. So basically, it meant that we were homeless. Actually, I mean, we couldn't keep our home, jobs, or everything else that we had built up, our business and things like that. So all I had with me was a backpack full of clothes. I was then homeless and going through chemotherapy. And basically, I was just living in friends and family's spare room and lounge chairs and things like that, just sleeping it off, sort of thing. But I did, I didn't. My wife was great about that. Actually, I did give her a couple of options. I did tell her that because I felt selfish about it because it was me that was sick, So I told her, look, if you go back to Japan and you decide you want to stay and just get on with your life, that's fine. I completely understood that, and she was free to do that. And I told her, look, maybe if I can beat this in a year or so, maybe I can go back and meet you there, and we can pick up again. Because I was still thinking I was going to get past this. There wasn't a point where I thought, at that point especially, I just did not think that this was going to beat me. But she was wonderful. I didn't even have to ask her to do it, to give it all up, because she would be giving up her career, her home, and her family to come and look after me. But I didn't have to ask. She just told me to stop being stupid, and of course she'd do it. She was brilliant. So we had to, obviously, she had to go back to Japan to do all that. And the doctors gave me a couple of months, so we didn't really know if we're ever going to see each other again anyway. We thought that very well might be the last time we saw each other at the airport. And then for the next few months, while I'm going through this treatment, I had to try and find a way to set us up here in Australia as well. I had to find us a place to live, set up, bank accounts and, all sorts of things, just, like an international move, and find a way to get a visa for her to stay here with me. So, it was a really chaotic time. But, the R-CHOP was a particularly brutal, heavy dose chemotherapy as well. So it left me, my mouth would, after every treatment, my mouth would fill up with ulcers. My tongue would swell up, and, I couldn't move my mouth, even open or close. I had severe IBS from the chemotherapy, of course. I couldn't eat or keep anything down anyway. So for the first couple of weeks, I was pretty much fasting. And it gave you this bone-shattering pain. Like, it was so sensitive. Like, it felt like the weight, even just lying on bed, it felt like the weight of my body was going to crush my bones into dust. It was the most, it was extremely painful, but also one of the most unusual sort of pains I've ever felt. I could actually feel the suture joints in my skull, it was, so it was pretty brutal. And then you start to develop, as the treatment goes on, you start to develop what they call white coat syndrome. Whereas just the thought of going back to the hospital or seeing the hospital, or certain smells would make you sick. I got so sensitive, like even just being around other people, like other people's body odor would make me sick. just looking at the medications that they had me on before I had to take them would make me sick. Sometimes I'd look at these pills for an hour before I could, try and get them down. And some of them, one of them was an injection, a white cell injection. Sometimes I'd stand at the sink, I'd be sick, I'd be vomiting violently. And just looking at this injection just made me sick, just looking at it before I could even get it into me. So it was pretty brutal. It went out to 8 rounds. That's the most you can give a patient on these treatments. And it got me down to...
Sorry to interrupt. What period of time is 8 rounds over?
It took just over 6 months, about 6.5 months. So it was every 3 weeks. Yeah. So from there, it took me from stage 4, along with the operations and things like that. They can't operate on the tumor, of course, because it's wrapped around my aorta. And of course, with blood cancer, it's in your blood, so they can't really take anything out. But most of the operations are on my kidneys. Because in the lymphatic system, all the lymph nodes in my body were cancerous tumors as well. They were malignant. So, it's just riddled everywhere, and by the time we got to the 8th round, it was a very up and down sort of roller coaster of emotions and that sort of thing as well. But it was quite effective. It shrunk my tumor down by 30%, and it cleared my blood, and they put me in what they categorize as stage 2. So, and they were happy with that as a remission. From there, we did 18 rounds of radiation, like targeted radiation on the tumor. That was a cakewalk. That was so easy. Like compared to R-CHOP, there was no pain involved. It took 2 minutes to treat. It did make you feel a bit sick, but a few medications took care of that. But after that, it was they put me on a plan, a rituximab plan that it was supposed to last 2 years and have chemotherapy every 2 months to try and prolong a remission period. So it was pretty easy to deal with this one. The chemotherapy, it made me sick for about anywhere between 3 and 5 days, sometimes out to 5 days. But after that, I was pretty good. I felt pretty good for the most part. And I still had a lot of side effects from the chemotherapy, from the first lot of the R-CHOP. So I had to deal with, and I still had to do kidney operations, and the stents being replaced and things like that. And of course, flushing all that chemotherapy through one kidney is something I need to make sure I keep a lot of water as well. But, it wasn't too bad. The rituximab wasn't too bad. And about a year into it, I was feeling pretty good. I was feeling pretty positive. And I was still going and having this treatment every 2 months. But, after 5 days or so, I was fine. And about a year into it, I was feeling that good. I started going back to the gym with my wife and started training again. So I was feeling really positive, actually, about beating it and getting over it, So this was, about 2013, mid 2013. And, November, I had another test, another treatment, and I was doing really good. And then January 2014, and almost 2 years to the day, they told me, I went back for another treatment, and they told me that it was back. I was back up to very high stage 4 again. So basically, I'd just done 2 years solid of chemotherapy, and I was back to square one. So that was really demoralizing. At the time, just before this, I was feeling great. I was back in the gym, and I was thinking, I can get past it. And then they tell me it's back again, and it's very high stage 4 again. So from there, they wanted to put me through a clinical trial. And this is something I had to think about before we started. Because I was starting to think, well, what's the point? If I could go through all of that, and I didn't really get much of a remission. I was still on treatment through this so-called remission time. It took me it took me about a week or so to decide whether or not to go through with it. I did ask my doctor, look, if I decide not to continue with this, how long do you think I would last? And again, it was much the same as the first time. It would only be 2, maybe 3 months. So, so after discussing it with the wife again, we just decided to go with it. And they did say though, this clinical trial was for a drug called bendamustine. Now, this was supposed to be as effective as the R-CHOP, but without any of the painful side effects. So I figured, well, okay, if it's not going to be as painful, then it should be a bit of a cakewalk, and it won't be a problem. I got through R-CHOP. I should be able to get through this. So we started the first treatment about a month later, or a little less actually, about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, and from there, I was driving myself to and from the hospital. So when I got home after the first treatment, I had a really bad fever, and it just started to skyrocket. I couldn't really think straight. I was dizzy, so I went to sleep it off. And my wife told me, we had to call an ambulance, so she did. And it was lucky that she did, actually, because I wouldn't have made it through the night otherwise. So from there, I spent next few nights in hospital again, and they said, we'll get it worked out. You should be fine after the first one, and but it continued. The next treatment was much the same, and because it was pretty good that it was at least in a clinical trial. I had a clinical nurse that was always keeping tabs on me every day, which really helped. The second one and third one started giving me blood clots in my arms as well. And then by the fourth one, I had long blood clots from my wrist up to my shoulders, basically on both arms, because they just swapped one arm for another, and then they both just filled up with blood clots, and they were so thick it kind of looked like a 3D road map, in both my arms. So then they decided to put a port in my chest. So this was like a little rubber tube, and like a little port they slip underneath your skin, and it kind of just looks like a big lump in your chest. And that way they can just plug it in with a needle and then pump it straight into your heart so that it gets dispersed really quickly. Which was a bit of a concern because they just filled up both my arms with these giant blood clots, and now they want to feed it straight into my heart. So I was kind of concerned, like, what's it going to do to it, But we're halfway through, and Well, I just figured I just didn't really have anything to lose at the time, so we kept going. Um, the tests we had test every treatment to see how it's working. So far, like the fourth and fifth one, it hadn't done anything really. Um, and so they continued out to 8 treatments again. And by the end of it, it pretty much didn't do anything. I was still very high stage 4, even after all that. Um, so it nearly killed me a few times along the way. And like half the treatments, I spent a few nights in hospital because of fevers, my heart rate, and different other things, the blood clots and things. And I was still very high stage 4. So we had to do a stem cell transplant. And it just got worse. So this meant that it's a very heavy dose stem cell transplant, and the first 7 days would be 24 hours of chemotherapy treatment just running through my body. And to do that, they needed to put another line into my heart on my right side. So I had a port in my left and another two tubes sticking out of my heart on the right side. And this time it would actually hang out 2 long tubes with 2 connectors to run different types of chemotherapy at the same time. Now this tube is it's called a CV line, and it's supposed to stay in there for up to 6 months in case you need treatment after the transplant. Mine had an infection in it in day 3, so they had to pull it out. This was, it was pretty unusual technique actually. You go under and you have an operation to have this put in, but when they took it out, we just had one nurse brace my shoulder and another one just pull it out, and it was job done. It kind of felt like living in the dark ages. So from there, it got really I was very unstable because of the infection. From that day on, it was very difficult. I had trouble breathing. I had trouble. My heart rate was racing, and it was all over the place. I would pass out. I would stop breathing. I stopped breathing a number of times. It got to the point because I stopped breathing so often that and I'd wake up on all these breathing machines and doctors surrounded by doctors and nurses trying to get me breathing and whatnot. It got to the point where the nurse would come in every half an hour at night as well to wake me up just to make sure I was breathing. And this, this was all going on while my wife was sitting in a chair next to the bed. She was sitting there all day watching this happen. That's something I should say as well. Like, she was so good through that period. In the morning she would make something for me to eat if I could eat something through the day. Then she'd come in on bus and sit there next to my bed the whole day until that night, until about 6 o'clock at night. Then she'd go catch the bus home, go shopping, and then she'd do the whole thing again every day. It was remarkable. It was amazing. It felt amazing to me to see her there, and through such a tough time, I think because I had trouble breathing, and the nurses were waking me up to see, to make sure I was still there. This lasted with my wife for quite some time. For the next 3 years, if I was sleeping a bit longer, she would wake me up just to make sure I was breathing. Sometimes in the middle of the night. So yeah, it got a bit funny later on, but
So it's almost like trauma transferred over to your wife.
yeah, yeah, kind of like PTSD. But the transplant was particularly rough. It was quite brutal. Going into it, they told me I needed to make a will because they didn't think I'd survive. Um, and quite often, I almost didn't because I stopped breathing a number of times. My heart rate was all over the place. I'd pass out. I'd sort of wake up and I'd have these breathing machines on me and heart rate monitors and that sort of stuff. Um, I was determined to get out of there, though. I was, you know, it, there was another guy in the room next to me. He had a transplant as well, but it was very mild dose, and he was out in 2 weeks. And that sort of made me very stir crazy. I just did not want to be there. And about the 4 week mark, I guess they let me go because I was pretty much just complaining the whole day. I just did not want to be there. So they let me go home. It was on a Friday, and I slept when I got home on the Friday night. Like I couldn't move. I couldn't walk. I was cooked inside out. I was red like a lobster. I had lost about 100 pounds, about 40 kilos while I was there, and my body was so brittle and frail. My muscles felt like they would snap if I moved. My bones were brittle. Everything was just wrong. It was just I was cooked, and I was bringing up layers and layers of skin from the inside. All my organs, my brain was just mush. It was all cooked. But they let me go for the weekend, and I slept through that Friday night, and when I woke up, I was so dry because I wasn't on any fluids like in the hospital. And my wife, she was the next day. She wanted me to get a hospital, get an ambulance and go back to the hospital, but I was a bit stubborn about it, and I sort of waited it out till the Monday morning because I had to go out. I had to go back to the hospital on Monday anyway. But that weekend almost killed me because I was too stubborn to go back to the hospital. But as soon as I got to the hospital, they saw my condition. They put me in a wheelchair and took me up to the ward. And like 5 minutes later, I was back in the ward in the ward bed for another week. It felt good to me though at the time because I just had to get out of the place at the time. I didn't know what it was. It just felt like I was going to die there. So I had to get out, and it felt good, even though it was very risky. It felt good that I actually managed to get out, and when I did go back, I did feel much better about it actually. Okay, so from there, I spent the next 2.5 years pretty much in bed at home in a small studio, because all we could afford to rent at the time that was close to the hospital was the tiny studio flat. I mean, it was tiny, like literally, like from the bed to the bathroom was 2 steps, and I couldn't even do that. I couldn't walk. Everything was just so dried out and brittle. Like I said, I'd lost 40 kilos in that transplant. So I was very much underweight. I had my muscles were dried out, all my tissue was just dried out, my organs, my brain, everything was just cooked. I was still very red. Yeah, it took a little over a month before my outside skin actually started to return to normal color. It looked like I'd been boiled, and I had just had layers coming off the inside of my mouth, my tongue, and from my organs just inside. It was just both ways. It was just skin coming out. They gave me severe IBS, a lot of reflux. I had many ulcers in my stomach because of it. I couldn't think. I couldn't concentrate. Like people would come and visit and talk to me for hours, and 10 minutes later, or even halfway through a conversation, I'd forget what we're talking about, or 10 minutes after they left, I'd forgotten they'd ever come in and were talking to me. Even to this day, I can't remember conversations that I had with these people, or them even being there. So I pretty much stayed there for 2.5 years, pretty much in bed. It took me a long time to get moving again. I did start. I had trouble breathing because my muscles couldn't move properly. So I started breathing. I started doing a modified version of like Wim Hof deep breathing exercises until I could do the real thing. And that really helped, actually. It helped me get my lymphatic system moving, helped me get my muscles moving again, and I could breathe a lot better. And then, I started moving my arms and legs and getting the rest of my body moving and walking again. And it took me quite a while before I could actually just keep up with my wife. And that, to me at the time, that was kind of a victory, like I could keep up with my wife and go for a walk, but it also left me, very tired for a long time. Like, even just going for, like a 20, 30-minute walk, I would need to come home and sleep again for hours, So I spent a lot of time sleeping. I went through, this period for a couple of years where it just didn't. Well, after the transplant, I noticed though that I was craving meat like I'd never had before, and after eating meat, like I didn't really sort of take much notice at the time, but looking back now, I realized how much my body craved it because, I'd eat a kilo of meat in one sitting and I just, it would just soak it up like a sponge, all the fats and the proteins, and it just soak it up like a sponge. It just felt great. But at the time, I didn't really think a lot about it. I'm a strength coach, so I knew, I need protein to rebuild my body. So, I was always keen to eat more meat. But, this is my second time being stage 4. I've been through all this treatment and they keep telling me that it's only going to keep coming back. And I'm basically living blood test to blood test because every time you get a blood test on follicular lymphoma, it could be that time they tell you that it's back, So I just didn't have anything to really, I didn't see the point in trying to get healthy again, So I spent a number of years just eating anything. And I'd quite often say, I'd eat all this junk food and I'd say, well, what's it going to do? Give me more cancer? Like that was my out, like it didn't matter. It didn't matter how fat I got. And, because I wasn't doing it, I was sleeping most of the day. So I ended up quite big, actually, like a 48-inch waist, for me, pretty much, maybe pretty round, really. I think the body, I mean, you forget pain, and when you get past it, your body sort of heals, and your body sometimes will heal faster than your emotions will, mentally. And it took me quite a number of time, a number of years to get really past the point where, I just didn't care, because it was at that time when I couldn't move, and all that you think about every time you get a blood test is it going to come back? Is it this time? You end up just thinking, well, bring it on. What's the point? I don't want to spend the rest of my life in hospital. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in bed, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life on treatment, on chemotherapy. So I was quite happy for it to just not wake up, for a long time. But after sitting there for a number of years, I'm thinking, something has to change. You either have to get on with dying or get on with living. And that was it. That was pretty much it. I was back to walking again. I was breathing, which helped me. Deep breathing helped me feel a lot better, and think better. But I wasn't really doing anything, and I was just pretty much just waiting for the next blood test to tell me that I'm dying again. And my wife, she was going to the gym, and I was thinking, I can't stand. She's fitter than I am, and I'm just doing nothing. The whole day is basically spent in bed. So eventually, about the 5-year mark, I decided to go back to the gym, and this was really good. I mean, at first, it's a really positive feeling just to feel like you are doing something again, and it also gives you a goal again, which makes you feel like you're not just wasting time. And it felt really good. Before that, I mean, I'd have setbacks, of course, because after the transplant, they decided to give me all sorts of these vaccine injections and things like that, and that just crashed my immune system, really. And it took me a long time to get past that as well. So when I went back to the gym, it felt great at the time, but I was also very susceptible to infections, colds and flus and things like that. And a cold would set me back 3 months, So it felt great. I was back in the gym, but as soon as I got sick, I was out of the gym again for the next couple of months. And a flu, it would put me back a good 6 months, because I just couldn't get rid of it, or it would even put me back in hospital. So coming back after each one, it's very difficult as well. You start to think, geez, I just don't know if I can do this. My immune system's not strong enough. I can't keep going. So that got pretty tough as well. You get those setbacks, and sometimes it's really difficult to get past. But I started looking at all these different things to try and boost my immune system, and I was adding all sorts of fruits, vegetables, herbs and spices. You try all these different things that all these gurus will tell you need. But it did help that I was pretty much eating mostly meat throughout this whole period, and even though it was slow, I was recovering. I was getting stronger each time. each year. And, I thought I was doing really well. I actually got it out to 9 years in remission, which, considering that the first year, the first two treatments were only 2 years apart, and the whole time I was pretty much on treatment, that felt really good. I managed to get all my medications down to just one, which from the start, I was on like 2 shopping bags full of medications, every time I went to the hospital. But I think this was also the problem with the first remission, was that, see, when you're going through chemotherapy, it's not just the medications you have to fight. It's not just the chemotherapy you have to fight. It's the medications. See, a lot of the medications are steroid based, and the steroids will drive your blood sugar up. And so what this basically means is that cancer feeds on sugar. When they do tests, they always run a sugar solution through you to see where it collects, and the tumors just eat it up. And, if you see it under a microscope, it just sucks it up like water in a sponge. So this whole time they're breaking my body down with chemotherapy, but they're feeding it sugar to which feeds the cancer. And I'm not saying it like it didn't work. It's just that these medications, I just don't think are the right. I mean, if you might need chemotherapy, but I don't think you need the steroids and things like that. The dietary advice is even worse. While you're actually going through treatment, that was one thing actually I saw when I was actually getting treated. I saw a lot of different people, all different ages. But some of these people would actually wheel their treatment trolley outside so they could have a cigarette. And at the time, I was thinking, this is crazy. Why are you even here? But they were doing the same thing to us. While we were being treated, they were giving us cakes, cookies, nothing but carbohydrates and sugars, sugar drinks, soft drinks, and like that. Literally, they'd almost force you to drink ginger ale because the ginger helps settle your stomach. Like, it was crazy. So I think this all sort of led up to the very short remission period. While I was going through all these treatments, I was on a lot of steroids and a lot of sugar. Aside from that, at home, throughout this period, we never eat out. We only ever cooked at home, which I think really helped a lot. And it kept me in remission. I was basically doing like a ketogenic sort of style diet for those 9 years. And, I thought I was doing really well, actually. I was doing very well. I was doing very well because, I'd made it to 9 years in complete remission. I was down on one medication. I still had IBS, and I had reflux and a few other side effects. But I still felt good. But the difference between being on that sort of ketogenic sort of diet and carnivore has been like night and day. It's been like you're almost there, but that you like say 90% there on keto, but that extra 10% is like a different world. And I started that about 6 months ago now, just over. And, it's, because basically I started, like I said before, I thought it was just ridiculous because, something my wife found, and, it's just a gimmick. But at the time, I really didn't have anything to lose. So I looked into it a bit more, and I found Dr. Baker, and then Dr. Canberry and Dr. Chafee and Professor Seyfried. And I saw what they were doing with diabetes. Now, they hadn't done it with cancer or blood cancer, my particular blood cancer at least. I saw what I don't know if you ever see that dog on YouTube had a tumor on its nose. Okay. Well, Professor Seyfried, they treated this dog, basically just put her on a carnivore diet, and this tumor just disappeared. Right. So after looking at all this stuff, I think, well, I'm either going to prove it or disprove it. So I went all in, and like I stopped taking my supplements. So I was taking, protein powders and vitamins and all sorts of stuff before. And I just thought, well, okay, let's just stop doing all that, and I'll just eat meat. So I just went on to, beef, ground beef mostly, steak, eggs, a little bit of bacon. And 3 months into that, I had another blood test with my oncologist. Previous to this, my blood markers had all been quite low. They were still well below a healthy, normal range. Within 3 months of carnivore, my blood markers across the board jumped an average of 8 to 10 points. And this got me really excited,
So just to clarify, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it jumped up, so that got me really excited. Before that, before the last couple of years, I've been feeling pretty good, but before that, it was every blood test. I was just living blood test to blood test, and like even the lease on my house, my apartment, I would never go past 6 months, because that's every 6 months I was getting blood tests. So just didn't see a point to having at least longer than that. So that's what we did. But after this, my first blood test on carnivore, I decided to get myself another GP, because I hadn't had one for the last 4 years, because I just have a very deep distrust of them here in Australia. But I found, my wife found a really good GP who came out from Japan, is now working here in Australia, in Brisbane. And I had another blood test done. And so basically, just over 6 months in on carnivore, my blood markers have not just jumped more than 20 points. All of my markers, and there are quite a number of them, like my lymphocytes, my platelets, and all sorts of things, have now reached just inside a normal, healthy range, which is just...
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's miraculous. It's a miracle, really. So it's, for all that, there've been a number of improvements. Quite a lot of improvements since going carnivore. But of course, this is the big one. All my blood markers are now in a normal, healthy range, which I didn't ever think would be possible again. After the last 12 years, I started to think, well, it's just not going to happen, But, since starting also, I've had, you get, a lot of carnivores, they say this brain fog is lifting. That brain fog lift has been absolutely amazing. I can concentrate again. I can think. I can remember things better. And it's continued continuing to improve. Like, it just keeps getting better. And you know, like after 3 solid years of chemotherapy, like all very heavy dose chemotherapy, my brain was cooked. You know, so to get any kind of ability to think again back, it feels fantastic. My IBS is gone. I used to treat it with sauerkraut, you know, fermented vegetables like sauerkraut and kimchi. But now I don't need it at all. I don't have any reflux. I don't have any joint pain, anything like that anymore. And, you know, basically at the moment, you know, after being stage 4 twice and with follicular lymphoma, at the moment I have 0 medications. I'm on absolutely 0 medications at all, and no health issues. In the first couple of months going carnivore, I started to get a cold, and basically what I did was increase the fat intake. I started eating beef fat as a snack, and it lasted 2 days, you know. Whereas before it would last me 3 months. Yeah. You know, to go from months out of action, out of, you know, in bed with a cold or flu, to 2 days is just, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just like the change and how quickly that's happened is just phenomenal.
Yeah. And even though I was back in the gym and I'd lost a lot of weight before I started carnivore, I wasn't trying to lose weight. I just, you know, because I'm more worried about my blood. I've lost nearly 40 pounds.
If you take, like, there's that kind of the chemo period and all this recovery that you went through where your body was basically cooked. When you compare the time before that to now, I mean, have you recovered to the same level as you were before all this happened? Do you feel?
No, actually, I feel better. I feel better because it took me some time before I was diagnosed, and you know, like the year of the earthquake, and before that, you know, I was having some issues with colds and flus and that. I feel like I'm in my 20s again. You know, like I'm 50 years old now. But you know, like I'm back in the gym, and you know, 5-6 days a week. I don't need a nap afterwards. I'm not sleeping most of the day, and I feel great. I have great energy levels. Like I said before, we just got back from Japan last week, and just getting around in Japan, we did an average of 21,000 steps a day, like every single day.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
think that's
great, actually.
one thing that people don't bank on coming to Japan is how much you're going to have to walk around and climb
Yeah,
steps and all that kind
yeah.
of thing. So
And how
the
much
fact
is,
you
you
can
know,
do that.
uphill as well. You know, they love stairs in Japan. You know, it's really great. But another thing is, you know, before carnivore, I would get, you know, if I was just awake for more than a couple of hours, I'd be so tired, and then I'd get fevers, and you know, I always have to watch my fever and make sure I'm not, you know, it's climbing a bit. But I haven't had a fever. Even traveling to Japan, doing all this walking around in large groups of people, I didn't even have a fever, not a headache, not a problem at all. It was an amazing trip, you know.
Just listening to your story, it sounds like when you're going through the chemo, I mean, you can really feel how demoralizing and it would have been to you go through all that. You've climbed to the top of the hill, you've beat everything off. You got to the top of the hill and they go, "Oh no, it's back again."
Yeah,
And it's like you push down to the bottom of the hill. Like I mean, your outlook for the future must be completely different now than it was when you were going through all that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, now I'm looking um, long term, what I can do long term. Um, and that took a long time to work up. Like I said before, I was only ever living blood test to blood test, and at first that was every week, you know, and then eventually got out to every 6 months, and it's still every 6 months now. But I'm not concerned about that anymore. I'm not concerned about my blood test. I'm actually looking forward to my blood test now. Whereas before, it would, that the week of the blood test would be quite stressful. But now I'm also looking to plan what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Whereas before, it didn't matter because I didn't have a rest of my life. You know, there was no future to look for or to plan for. Whereas now I can do that. You know? It's a completely different lifetime ago.
Like, does it actually feel like that? Does it feel like you've closed the door?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Um, like I said before, you forget pain. You know, it doesn't. I mean, I remember what it was like back then, but I don't remember the actual pain itself. I don't feel that pain again. You know, so it's something that I can talk about, but it's not something I don't need to really relive it anymore. You know, it's like a story, but the next part of my story is only just starting. So it's it's just like closing a book, and you move on to the next one. And it's hard. I know it's very difficult for people to understand that when you are in a tough situation, it's really or like I couldn't move for years. It's hard to get going, and when you have a setback, it's hard to get to overcome it and get going again. But basically, what all I did was I I didn't look at what I couldn't do. I looked at what I could do. So, for example, when I started doing breathing exercises, I couldn't do even the basic level entry for like Wim Hof sort of breathing exercise. So I cut that in half, and then I started with that. And then when I could do that, I felt, well, okay, this is good. I can do this. What can I do now? And I sort of look at it like, it's sort of like driving at night. You might not always have a long-term plan in mind because you can't really see that far ahead. But, if you have a small plan, like just like a one step at a time sort of thing, your headlights let you see so far. And then when you get to that point, it lets you see it a little bit further ahead, you know? So I'd get to that point and I'd think, okay, what can I do now? Okay, then I'd do this. And then, okay, what can I do now? And it just progressed from there, you know? Just a few short years ago, I couldn't walk. I couldn't move. I couldn't even get off the bed for, even 10 minutes. But now, you have a look at some of my training videos. I do some pretty big things. And it just takes one step at a time, you know.
That's definitely the best way to be looking at it. Just do what you can and keep moving forward, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's DC Learning to Live, because basically it's not just about me. It's see, I am learning to live again. I know it seems a bit late at 50, but you start where you can. And I believe that no one is an expert on life. We are all here just learning to live, basically. So That's why I call it. That's why I call it DC learning to live. Um, basically, what I really want to show people is that um, it doesn't matter what tough time you're going through. Tough times are not permanent, and you will, and you can get past it. And if you just put the effort in, just one step at a time, you will eventually get there. It's like climbing a mountain is, if you look at the peak all the time, it looks overwhelming. But if you just focus on that next step, eventually you're going to get there. Another reason I started this is because I want people to see that you are stronger than you think you are, and try not to give up. It sort of drives me a bit. I just don't want people to think that just because it's tough now that it's never going to get better. It can do. It really can. Hopefully, if my story can help some people in not just going through tough times, but also going through treatments themselves, I'd like to help with that as well. So I interviewed Professor Seafried once, and I have some more interviews coming up with some other doctors too that will help people on treatments and hopefully with diet, and hopefully prevent it. If people can get onto carnivore before they get sick, that would be ideal.
Definitely. DC, I really appreciate you talking to us today and sharing your journey, and I'm very very happy to hear what where you are now in that journey. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dave. It's like I said before, I really appreciate you having me on your channel. Actually, thanks very much.